everyone. So I'm back, and I have a very special guest because it's somebody I've wanted to reconnect with for a very long time. It's the lovely Brooke coming to us from Australia today. And we have so much to discuss, I almost don't know where to start. But I did want to start by saying, do you remember where we met?
Yeah, I do. So I stayed at the Beverly Wilshire. It was one of my first hotel collaborations, like very randomly back. I'm going to say it was like 8 years ago. Do you remember?
Longer. I think it was like literally a decade ago.
Oh, yeah. So I started my blog 10 years ago. So I knew it must be something close to that. But yeah, probably right on like a decade ago. And so at the time I was doing PR at the Beverly Wilshire. And this is what I remember of you. And I'm saying this as a preface, as a jumping off point, because so Brooke is was very early to the game in terms of travel blogging and writing and figuring out the business aspects of it. And then, you know, being an author and the ebooks and like building other businesses too, which we'll get into it. But when I met you, I was like, I had come from media and other PR, and I'm like, this girl's so smart and she's going to figure this out so fast and like catapult herself. And like literally within the year, I saw you explode online. And I love your storytelling and your content. It's authentic and it's beautiful. And also because I felt this in common with you, you're a brave traveler and you're a big solo traveler, which is a big focus of your writing. So you just took off. And obviously you're from Australia. And there's loads of, I mean, it's a long haul to a lot of places, but I feel like there's not a lot of places you haven't been. And now it's like up to 80 something countries. People always ask me, and I'm like, I don't sit down and count it. So it's something up there.
It's what? So where are you originally from in Australia?
So I was born and raised in Tasmania, and that is where I have pretty much called home my entire life. Like I will come and go, and I recently did a stint living in South Africa, got stuck there in Cape Town during the pandemic, and currently I've just moved to Brisbane. So this is the first time kind of really living elsewhere in Australia. And the reason behind that, people ask me all the time, and I'm sure people probably wonder, but we just wanted like more sunshine, like more sunny days, more summer. And where I'm from, it's very cold. So here we are.
That's right. I remember following your move to South Africa, which looked beautiful. We can get into that later. And then being back in Australia, I think there's a lot of people who are connecting to where they want to be, certainly near family. And for you, because you also have other businesses, you're opening a new bakery, or you have opened a new bakery in Brisbane, which looks fantastic. I felt like, I don't know if you were doing research when you were in Europe lately, but I followed that trip too. I'm like, if that's what she's doing, I'm really envious.
No, I was. It opens it's about 2.5 weeks from now. So I'm at that really nervous stage of what happens if I open and nobody comes? What happens if I open and everybody comes? So it's like worst case scenario. But yeah, this is my second bakery that I will have opened, and about my fourth or fifth business venture. I just am obsessed with the entrepreneurial side of like building and opening businesses and creating like brand stories. So that's really cool to me. And then in the background this entire time, for the last 10 years, I've had my travel blog, and that's enabled me to travel and see the world. And that was always the purpose of it as well, was like a means to an end, like to be able to travel the world, to be able to make money from it eventually was amazing, but I never started it thinking that that would happen. So I think that's really helped along the way as well. Like now people probably get into it thinking, yeah, this could be a career, or this could be, you know, like lucrative for me, but starting out at that time where it just wasn't a job and it wasn't a career was a really great organic way to get into it for, I guess, the right reasons.
No, 100%. And I think, well, first of all, we should say the blog and the Instagram handle is World of Wanderlust, which is a great name. That's how you know early days, because you got the name that everybody would kill for. But like I said, your content was so strong. And I just remember thinking, I mean, I always love seeing people just going out there and just doing it. And I really admire that kind of bravery. And you were so young when you started, and really, again, early in the game and figuring it out very quickly. And so I'm wondering, you know, what was kind of the seed that was planted? What was it that catapulted you at the beginning where you're like, I'm just going to do this and see how it goes and figure it out as I go, because you have very good media instincts. And again, I don't say that lightly because I see a lot of people that do not. I've been in this game a long time. So I'm like, where is this girl coming from? She's just got it. So what was that, the beginning point where you're like, I'm just going to do it and figure it out? Because really people were just starting kind of around that time when you were.
Yeah, so what it was, and I don't know if you've read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, but essentially like everything kind of lines up. I was in there at the right time and kind of helped, I think, kind of shape this as becoming a legitimate career for people. And I was in that first original kind of few people who were using Instagram as a form of doing business, but it very organically happened. So I was seeing on Instagram at the time a lot of fashion bloggers, and a lot of them were girls from Australia. So immediately I was exposed to them by using the Instagram app, and they were bloggers like Gary Pepper Girl, Tula.
Yes.
Do you remember these names?
Oh, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So they were like massive, and they were blowing up across the world. And when I say blowing up, it was like, I don't know, maybe like 50 to 100,000 followers, which was huge back then. Not many celebrities were using the app. And when I came to see you, actually, not many celebrities were using the app, because I remember running into kind of like, I would say like a C- D grade celebrity. And they were asking me, how do you have this many followers on Instagram? So like, it just wasn't a thing then that they really understood either. And I was seeing all these fashion bloggers on Instagram, but they were promoting their outfits. Like they were in Paris, they were in Milan, they were in New York, they were at all the fashion shows, and they were wearing these stunning outfits, but in the background is what I was most interested in. So like they would be, you know, in front of the Duomo Cathedral or walking along the Seine River. And I just remember thinking I would love to see more of what they're actually doing in those places. Like I'm just seeing clothes. And it's always been kind of my prerogative that to buy experiences rather than things. Like I have very little, I have a few designer things. I mean, every girl has like a handbag or a pair of shoes in their closet, you know, like
sure.
But I have always really saved my money and spent it on experiences. So I wanted to create an Instagram that showed the places rather than the clothes. And I kind of saw that no one was doing it and thought, you know what? What's the worst that happens? What am I going to lose? I started a blog back on Blogspot.
Blogspot. I had one of those too. Early days.
/blogger. I don't really know. And I just started kind of sharing some stuff. And when I got the first few comments from people who I didn't recognize, like my mom, I was like, okay, like, people are interested in what I have to say. This is cool. And so I started a WordPress site. If you ask my parents, they will tell you this word for word. I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. Like I was obsessed with learning how to build a website, how to do everything about it. And my idea was I never came from money. I never had money. And so for me, it wasn't a decision. Like I couldn't pay a web developer. So I had to learn how to do it. And that's probably what catapulted everything in my career was I learned everything rather than paying people to do it.
It's a really, really good point, because that kind of initiative and drive and I think curiosity to figure things out, I think is a key thread through all success, like through everything. So people that don't take the time to understand how things work, you're really going to be in trouble later. And I even see it in like C-suites where like leadership maybe never understands how something works. And it's really important because it will dictate your choices and the growth and everything later. Because that really was, I remember seeing it catapult really fast, but you had clearly done the work and a lot of time to figure out how those things were being made. And you're right, actually, now that I think about it, there were so many Australian influences because Gary Pepper Girl, I remember following her too. And I love that what you said about seeing behind the photo, because I think that's still the biggest mistake today, that obviously more and more people are in the travel game, but I still see people all the time. And when I worked in PR before, there would be people like pitching me to do stories, but then I would look at their grids and it was just photos of them and like no context on the location, no insight on like the local culture or what was happening. And it's such a disconnect because that's not the point.
Yeah, and I think like that stuff works for people who are in the fashion industry. Like if you're selling clothes.
For sure. Yeah.
And you can like break it all down. Like if that's how you make money by affiliate marketing, so you're wearing a dress and you're clicking the link and someone's making money from it, then that makes sense. But if you want to go and stay at a hotel, like let's say there's also like a broad range in that sense. Like if you want to stay at a luxury hotel, you need to position yourself in the luxury market and be, you know, that bit more conservative and not be constantly doing, you know, bikini shots and stuff. Like as it just is the truth. Like I sat down and had this conversation this week, actually with the PR team from the Four Seasons for Asia Pacific. And that was the first thing they said to me. They were like, we love that you're not like selling yourself and kind of like not selling your soul on the internet, but like using your body, especially as a female. Like you don't have to do that. You can create a brand around other things. It doesn't have to be centric to yourself. And it was interesting hearing it from somebody else without me even leading into that conversation. I was like, okay, so people understand that.
For sure. And like you made a good point. I mean, yes, there's fashion, outlets, Instagrams, that is the primary content. And then you have the lifestyle, which could be a whole mix of things, which is kind of what a lot of it is. You just have a slant towards stuff. And part of the travel, I mean, you want to follow the personalities, so you still want to see you within the picture. But I think when I look at your photos, I feel like, oh, I'm following her journey, or I'm following her adventure, or so I'm like, you're part of it. And then you're kind of picturing the bigger world of what you've stepped into, and then you've caught that moment. So I think that's what you've always done so well. So I kind of want to talk about then your initial travel, because again, this takes a lot of bravery. So you're working on the blog, you're trying to figure this out. Do you remember what the first trip that you took like abroad was on your own?
So I was 20 years old. And I had just gone through my first breakup.
Aww. Yeah.
So many solo travel, like people who become solo travelers, it stems out of like some kind of heartbreak, or, you know, like even a friendship breakup where you were planning on going somewhere with someone and then they pulled out or whatever. So I decided to book not a one-way trip. I booked a 3-week trip to Europe and stopped in Hong Kong on the way, because I'd been to Hong Kong before, so I was really familiar with it. It was that kind of safety blanket that I needed to be somewhere where I understood where things were. I knew the neighborhoods. I felt safe there. So I started there and had a few days in Hong Kong and then went over to Europe. I did Paris, Prague, Shishki Krumlov, Salzburg, Vienna, Budapest, and London. It was a big undertaking for 3 weeks. Yeah, I remember just being like, wow, this is a lot. And I honestly, by the end of the trip, like by the time I was in London, I was ready to come home. Like I was like, this is so much time alone. Yeah. I have a super type A personality. I'm a Virgo. Like I spend a lot of time analyzing, thinking. I was like, I'm done with me for now. Like I need to.
I got to get out of my head.
Yeah, literally. And I was like, this is a lot. But I think with, a lot of people in solo travel, you really fear that first trip. And then from there, you're completely hooked. Like, I've never understood people saying the travel bug. I'm kind of like, I love to travel, but being alone, I think that is what I'm hooked on. Those experiences of places for the first time, but alone. And I have had boyfriends come and go, friends who want to come on trips, family members begging me to take them places. And I would say 9 times out of 10 prefer to go alone, because you have that experience completely to yourself. It's something that I hold very dear to myself, is to experience a new city or a new country or a new culture without any prejudices, and no one to be like, oh, wow, that's weird. Because I might think it in my head, but then I'll be like, hey, wait a second, I'm being really judgmental. This is just a culture or a society that is very different to my own. But when you have people around you, you don't really take a beat to think like that. You lean into that kind of cynical thinking. So yeah, I still prefer to go alone.
Well, I'm the same way, and I've always been an adamant solo traveler. And at this point, it takes a lot for me to want to travel with anybody else, because I like having the freedom of choice to move around. I like to take my time to observe things, and you kind of gain that confidence over time. So there was a time where I felt really nervous that I was sitting alone somewhere eating something, or if I was the only one on a tour, and now I literally don't think twice about it. And I know that I can come and go and make a different change. I always say plan for spontaneity. So I have things that I want to maybe do, and then I kind of figure out some stuff around it. But I think there's so much freedom, and obviously learning a lot about yourself. And sometimes it is being in my own head, and sometimes it's actually just being actively living, which I think sometimes we forget to do. We're back in our little silos. Sorry, I was like looking something in my phone. I had pulled some like stats the other day, actually, from a bunch of websites on women in travel, because something that I've always said is, I think there used to be an image where people were like, oh, it's, men are the ones going out there and doing this kind of travel and this and that. But the statistics, and I'll just give you 4, and these are things that I know that you know, but for listeners. So one, women make 70% of all travel decisions, which makes sense, whether you're a solo traveler or if you're like the head of a household, because you're essentially making those decisions. 73% of travel agents surveyed noted that more female travelers embark on solo trips than their male counterparts, which I actually don't find that surprising. I'm like, that makes sense. Yeah. According to 68% of travel agents, most female clients taking trips in small groups are over the age of 45, which I think, again, high net worth demographic, right? Women now have, especially in North America, the most degrees, highest paying jobs, and they're just like out there living their life. And the average...
Can I just say, like, societally, we accept that women can be single or can be a single mom. Like, there's so many things that we can do as women that we couldn't do 50 years ago. So it's like socially accepted to be doing that.
And it's definitely changed, because I used to not see a lot of other solo travelers. And now I see them everywhere. I mean, I'm talking women specifically, and of different ages too, which I think is fantastic. And the last one is the average adventure traveler is not a 20-year-old male, but a 47-year-old female, which I thought was really interesting.
Wow.
So I'm like, these are all very good things to note, and I feel like the other thing too, when you're a solo traveler, and you probably feel this too, is that I often meet other Americans or Canadians when I travel, and I'm in Spain right now, and I love just having conversations with people. And I think they're always so curious, right? Because they're equally like, what are you doing? Are you on your own? And some people are like, are you nervous? And they're people that haven't had those experiences. And by the end of those conversations, they're actually quite excited for me. And I think that they're kind of open to, I had never thought that I could do that, or I can. And I know that sounds so trivial, because there's loads of people that are, but for some people it really is a real fear. And I think you only have things to gain from that time alone. I see people on TikTok talking about that.
It's funny because I'll talk about this on my podcast, like all the different things that I feel about solo travel. And someone approached me at a Pilates class, I don't know, maybe like a few months ago. And she was like, I am, in my early 50s and I really want to travel, but your podcast was about why you should travel in your early 20s. And I was like, well, that is purely because that's my experience. Like, I've just turned 30, so I'm trying to encourage people who are in their 20s to do it. But I know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I know I will still be traveling and traveling.
Yes, you will.
What if I'm 65? No matter what, if I have kids, if I have a husband, I will still be packing my bags and be like, see you in 2 weeks, because it's just a part of me now that I can't ignore. It's so important for me to do that. It's like going to therapy or going to Pilates or yoga. Like, it's an outlet that I need.
Yeah, 100%. I find it like it's so good for space clearing and getting things in perspective. And I'm fully addicted to it as well. And it's so important. It is one of the most important things in my life, and will continue to be. I was just thinking too that, as women are going out more and more and having these adventures or seeing other people having them, there's Bazama St. John, who's a CMO, always talks about how to live life urgently, right? And I really feel that too, because, and I say this to all women, if you're waiting for somebody to have an experience, like you won't do half the things you want to do. So I always keep that in mind. I'm like, if I want to try something, I try it. If I want to go somewhere, I go and do it, because I wouldn't have done so many things if I didn't just go. Because what are you waiting on? You're going to wait on a friend to finally be able to do something with you. You're going to wait on a partner that you don't know when that's going to happen. Like, you can't wait. You just got to go see it.
Yeah, and even when that does happen, like, I'm in a really happy relationship right now, but I still went overseas the last few weeks alone, because it was something that he was like, you know what, I can't do it with my work right now, but if you want to go, go. And I fully took that in my
course.
See you in a month. But yeah, it's like, you don't have to wait as well. If you're in a relationship, you don't have, if you're feeling that and you want to do something, just do it. And I think that's also something I was really passionate about sharing through this trip, was like, you can be in a relationship and be at different stages of life. And there is a bit of an age gap between us too. And I think it's just important that if you're feeling something, to honor those feelings and do it. Like, especially if you're in the financial position and have the freedom of work, maybe you can work on the road. Like a lot of us now, our homes are our offices, so you can keep moving and doing that.
Yep.
But as soon as you make an excuse for yourself, you put it in the back of your mind and kind of think, think about it again in 6 months. 6 months becomes 12 months, 12 months becomes 2 years. And
that's right.
Something happens and you can't do it anymore. So it's like the time is now, always.
Well, and it's such a good point what you said about relationships, because this is a whole other conversation, but there's such strength in having like two independent people that are doing their own thing, right? Because you can talk about those experiences too. So I think that's another misconception. People are like, well, I'm always going to be traveling with my partner. Well, no, you can have trips with them, but like having your own trips again, whether it's with your friends or just by yourself, I think is just so important. And again, that might be coming from a very privileged place, but sometimes when I talk about travel, I don't necessarily, for some people, they can't travel across the world, but they can have a new experience in their city. They can sign up. Sometimes I'll do a random tour or like a bike tour in some places I already know really well, just because why not? I mean, it's just another way to see something. Often things that I miss, and getting some new perspective, taking a cooking class, with people that have a different background than you, those kinds of cultural touch points, I think are super key.
Yeah, especially through the pandemic, we've all been trying a few different things.
Quick side note on that, I was just reading an article how Airbnb and VRBO are VRBO, I don't know, I always say that wrong. Basically, both of them are completely slammed and booked up everywhere this summer, just because everybody after the pandemic is like, whatever, I'm going to double down on bucket list trips. I'm going to book everything I want. People are out in droves.
Yeah. There's been some interesting articles, actually, I think on CNN this week, about this is the worst summer of our entire existence to travel, because there's that 2 years of backlog. Yeah. Also, so many people have left the industry. So in the hospitality industry, it's happened too, but in the airline industry, so many people got laid off and they went and found jobs in different, in different services and industries, that there's this huge amount of people wanting to travel, and there's so much less staff there to actually make that happen. People are getting really frustrated because of the lines and the waits, in the airport, or it's expensive to travel this summer, but it's there's so many people, it's supply and demand, and you would know this in the travel industry.
Yeah, it's nuts. That's why I'm in Spain and Italy now, because this is the gap before all the tourists descend en masse. I have to touch down in California for a little bit. I know that's going to be chaotic too. It's just going to be, how are things in Australia? Because are things the borders are fully open now, right?
Yeah, the borders are fully open, and we've had pretty much, I think, the world over the harshest border control. I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but I was stuck in Cape Town, South Africa for 8 months and struggled to get, because they wouldn't accept more than, I think it was about 30 people per flight, and just a small number of flights per day. So they were limiting it. So I think about 500 travelers per day at one point. So, and that's citizens trying to get back into their home country. So it was a really stressful time, but also really, I think, humbling time to go, you know what, I'm so fortunate to have all of the freedoms that I have, to be able to travel the world and to be in this position. And I think I really needed that to realize how fortunate I was. I certainly realize whenever I'm traveling, especially in certain countries where you're like, I won the lottery by being born in Australia, or any Western nation. But to be stuck in a foreign country was a really humbling experience, because you don't have rights as a citizen. You don't have anything. You don't have healthcare, nothing.
Right. And it was there was so much activity happening in South Africa. Did you find it? You'd been there before you'd moved there, right?
Yeah, I've been a bunch of times, and it's definitely somewhere I always wanted to live. And so I was happy to be there, but it was a difficult time just in terms of all the lockdowns, and there was, a ban on alcohol. You couldn't really do anything. It was quite strict there as well. But
there's a ban on alcohol?
Yeah. Don't worry. I felt so naughty, but actually, I can speak about this now because whatever, nobody knows. But the compound that I lived in, one of our neighbors was a paramedic, and his family also owned a wine farm,
fantastic.
And so he had all this wine to offload, and I had this insatiable desire to drink it. So we just kept ordering it through him. It was great. He would like drive up in the ambulance and be like, "One delivery."
Oh my gosh. So that, it was very, I mean, I knew that it was strict there, but I had no idea that that was the degree of things being controlled. I mean, I guess everybody was just in a panic mode where they were just knee-jerk reacting. So when you got back to Australia, you must have been elated to see your family and to...
Yeah, I was, but it was also just this really weird feeling. I mean, also when I got back to Australia, I had 2 weeks of forced quarantine, and it was like very expensive. I had to fly first class to get home. So they were prioritizing the highest paying.
Oh my God.
To get home. Yeah. So to get home, it cost, I can't even tell you. It was so expensive. And then to have to quarantine on like level 25 of a hotel in Sydney, I was just like, I had vertigo. I was like, what is it? Like, why did I do this? But it was super lovely to get home to my family, home to my friends, and just feel like, you know, you had that support of like your government and your citizenship. But it was also just a really weird, I think everyone feels like the last 2 years, like snap and it's gone. Like, I don't even know where it went.
Yeah, the time is like, it doesn't even mean anything anymore. And it's interesting you say that about Australia, because I feel like loads of people on Instagram and TikTok, like going through their quarantine, like going crazy in their rooms. And I saw... It was wild, and I mean, I certainly sympathize, and it was happening in other places. I know for a period of time, I think it was happening in Canada and some other places as well. It was like a short window, but it was still happening. And of course, when the tennis players came through and them having to do the same thing more recently. But in London, there was a lot of people that were Australian that went home early on because they were like, if this is going to happen, then we'll be in Australia, we'll have more room. A lot of people with small kids are like, we'll have oceanfront or something and we're going to go. And that was certainly like a lot for them to go through to get back there, but then they stayed the entire time. So I guess now that the borders are opening, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with tourism in Australia. What are some places, I was talking to my other friend Sidonia in Australia, like many episodes ago, about her kind of favorite places to go. But obviously you've lived in a few different places, and certainly I'm sure you've traveled extensively in Australia as well, like you have it everywhere else, or maybe you haven't. Some people don't when they're in their own home. But do you have like some favorite places that might not be, you know, the automatic Sydney, Melbourne, like that you like going to, or would suggest people check out?
Yeah, I think for me, like, it's always going to be Tassie. I feel like an ambassador. Like, I've given myself that title. I love Tasmania. I mean, it's this little island off the coast of the mainland, and so it's separated. We literally call the rest of Australia the mainland. And Tasmania it looks really small on a map, but it would take you like, I don't know, probably 10 hours to drive the circumference of it. So it's not that small, and there's like 500,000 people live there. So it's like, it's somewhere between all the towns, like the cities, but they feel like towns. It's just this really cool vibe, and you feel like you've kind of stepped back in time. It's got a lot of like really beautiful nature. Like there's Wineglass Bay. I don't know if you've seen pictures of that, but it's very popular.
No, all I know is that all your photos when you're in Australia, like, kill me. I just want to transport myself there. So maybe there might be a photo in there somewhere. Yeah.
Isn't it funny though, because I think people crave the foreign. So like for me, I kind of like, I take these photos in Australia and I'm kind of like, oh, it's like not really that interesting. But for anyone outside of Australia, it's like, wow, the sand is so white, and the beach, like the ocean is so blue and crystal. And it's just like, Australia has so much, I think, natural appeal. And I think a lot of people are craving that, especially after the pandemic, like to be connected with nature again. And then the other two places I would say outside of Tasmania are both islands. One is Norfolk Island, which no one really talks about, especially outside of Australia. And it's just this beautiful little island. It's about 2 hours to fly straight off the coast of Sydney. And you drive, like I drove around in a little moke, a little beach buggy. Cows have the right of way. So if you're driving down the street and there's a cow there, you can give it a little polite toot, but you've just got to wait until it moves. Like it's just this like really off-grid, random place. And then the other place is Lord Howe Island, which is more popular and very like famous amongst kind of the, I guess, like Sydney elite fly there. It's quite expensive to fly there, and then it's quite expensive to be there, but it is just stunning. It has like this dramatic couple of mountains that you can climb, and then Yeah, it's incredible. And anywhere in Australia that anyone recommends is usually out of the cities anyways. Like Sydney and Melbourne, cool, they're fun to visit. But get out, get in nature. There's not many people in Australia for the amount of land that we occupy, so you can get out and really be connected with nature.
I get that because although I'm American and Canadian, I grew up in Canada. It's the same deal, right? It's a lot of land. It's not a lot of people. But I think with both U.S. and Canada, I always say the best way to see it is to road trip if you can, because it's the best way to understand the land, the vast landscape. Same with Australia. The geography, like the difference between the places is vast because they were founded very differently. So that's what I always think is fascinating. And if you can believe it, I've not yet been to Australia, which seems insane to me, but it is on my list. And now that the borders are open, I will factor this in as soon as I can.
In Canada, from?
So I primarily grew up in Alberta, which is like Rocky Mountain territory, I was not supposed to be born or raised there. It was supposed to be Colorado, but we went north. I have one Canadian parent, one American parent. Yeah, so I was raised there. I spent summers in Colorado, so I go back and forth. And then I lived in Vancouver where I went to university. And I always knew I wanted to, for me, from the time I was little, I was obsessed with New York and London. I was my parents will say I was running out the door. I was like, I'm going, I'm ready to go. So I had an internship in New York City and I never left. So it's an added bonus of having, dual citizenship. And so I lived in New York for very long time. I don't know, 12 years, 13 years, and then on and off. But my formative years, so I always feel like New York in my soul, and then lived in California for about 5. And we have a lot of very deep family history in the Southwest of the U.S. So I feel kind of a strong pull there, and then been in London for the last 2.
Can I ask you what you prefer over New York and LA? Because they're obviously, they're so different. It's chalk and cheese, right?
But they are, and there's so many jokes about, of course, the back and forth between the two cities. And people always laugh, too, that I've lived in LA and New York and London. So, oh, you're checking all the big city boxes.
Paris is next.
But the funny thing is that if you work in fields like media, entertainment, marketing, communications, those 3 cities, it's very common to run into the same kind of people because those industries, or industries around them, I should say, are kind of connected. And so there's loads of expat friends, especially Californians in London, right? And there's a ton of New Yorkers that have moved into California over the last many years as industry has shifted. It's not just entertainment there, it's now media and tech and a whole bunch of other things. So it's really exploded. And I think I always speak about this carefully because there would have been a time where I would have been bad-mouthing one over the other. But I've come to appreciate everything because I always like to dig in and understand where I am. So, in my soul, I feel like a stronger affiliation with New York just because I love the history of it. I like the brashness of it. I don't think New Yorkers are rude. They're just very blunt. And I really appreciate that. And I like that it's closer to a European city and that you walk everywhere, right? You're it's everybody's going to the museum and theater. And it's just a very cosmopolitanness that I'm pulled to. And what I also really love about living in London. LA is a completely opposite. And I always say to speak about LA versus California because the state of California is fabulous. You can't beat that coastline. Again, all the geography there is fantastic. Oh, hi, puppy.
Yes.
No, it's all the geography is amazing. So I much prefer being out of the cities. San Francisco and LA are okay, but I like driving around the state and being in Santa Barbara or Cambria or Yosemite and the national parks or Palm Springs. And there's just so many other places to go. Big Sur, there's so many other places that driving around is for pure pleasure. I never really felt comfortable in Los Angeles. I certainly came to appreciate it. I love movies. I love the history of how that industry came to be in that city. I think that you have a large Latino population that it gives incredible culture to that city. And so people, I always say Los Angeles is an umbrella, right? And then all these little towns are under that umbrella. So I think it's overwhelming to people when they come there because it's super spread out. It makes no sense to anybody coming from any other cosmopolitan city. They're like, what is this? And you have to drive forever. But if you take the time to really explore these areas and understand what's behind them, it becomes much more interesting. So it was a bit of a weird experience. I think the first time I was there, I didn't really feel it that much. And the second time I was there, I did, but I think it had a lot to do with where I was living, if that makes any sense.
That's my next question anyways.
Yeah, sure. So the first time I moved there, like every other person moving into LA, I like temporarily lived in West Hollywood just because it was close to work. So when I came to work at Beverly Wilshire, and it's central and it's easiest place to kind of transition in. The second time I knew where I wanted to live, and I lived in Beechwood Canyon, which is still one of my favorite places. So it's in the hills. And it's on it's more east though, so you have closer proximity to places like Silver Lake and stuff that have all the restaurants. And there's a lot more going on when you go more east in LA versus like Beach Town. Yeah, it's pretty, but it doesn't have the same amount of like things happening that when you go further east. And so I had a beautiful view of the city. Beechwood Canyon sits above Hollywood. So back in the day when Hollywood was coming to fruition, that's originally where like the producers and the directors lived. So it's got a kind of a special history. And there's a lot of plaques and interesting things in that neighborhood. And it felt kind of, in some days it felt like Italy a little bit, with the tall, thin trees and the weather, and it was amazing. It was a beautiful place to live.
Just plugging my laptop in.
No. Like it's going to die. Sorry, don't mind my ramble.
It's funny because I only lived in LA for a few months, and that was maybe like a few years ago now. And I booked a room. Like, have you heard of Australians in LA? It's this Facebook group where you can like connect with people, Australians in Los Angeles, obviously.
I'm sure there's loads of them. Yeah.
Loads of them. So this girl kind of like advertised this room, and I ended up renting a room from her in Beverly Hills. I was like probably 100 meters walk from the Beverly Wilshire, and I was just like, this is great, like I'm so central. And then I realized there's no culture in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do. You can't walk to a restaurant or a bar late at night. I pretty much lived at Cafe Gratitude because they opened in Beverly Hills. So it was so pretentious and so just not my vibe. And then my friend lived in Echo Park, and I spent my whole time at her place because it's like, you know, like there's lots of creatives, there's lots of young people, there's really
lots of restaurants.
Pretentious. It was, So if I lived in LA again, I think it would have to be on the east side.
Oh, yeah. And it's changed. I mean, it has accelerated with change very fast because as like advertising and tech and everything grew there, it brought like a ton of restaurants and a ton of these kind of like other demands that I would say East Coasters or Europeans that weren't there in droves that are there now really want. And so it shifted very quickly. And now it's booming as to be expected. But it's a wild place, and everybody's first experience there is funny. A lot of Europeans here make jokes about how their first like mandatory trip to the U.S. is always New York City, which 100% makes sense. And then they're fascinated by LA, but it also is like super bizarre to them, which I also understand. It's just because it's not built like anywhere else.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think in terms of living somewhere, I would live in New York over LA. Just that feeling of like you're constantly in it. Whereas LA, I think you're constantly spending your time getting to the destination. Like you're driving, you're going from suburb to suburb, and it's just, I don't know, it's just like so much effort and energy. And maybe it's like the older I get, the more I'm protective of like how much energy I expend.
100%.
Or person, or like all those things. Like you just become more aware. And I think New York, you can like walk out your street and you're like in that energy, like you can soak it back up.
And New York's built kind of around the London model where there's like a million trains that leave the city, right? So you can, at the very least, you can hop a train to so many states right around you very quickly. And I think that's an added bonus. Not that there aren't trains in California for anybody who's going to get on my back about it, but it's not the same thing. It's like, it's so much easier. There's always somebody will like, listen, I like living in both places. I want to say that right now.
On that note, though, I took a train from Los Angeles. They have like the most gorgeous train station, the downtown LA train station.
Yeah.
And I took a train to Encinitas, and that would be my favorite.
Yes.
If I lived anywhere on the coast, it would be Encinitas. It's stunning.
It's beautiful, so beautiful there, and that's also how I feel about Santa Barbara, which of course is just like an hour and a half north. And whenever I'm explaining it to people, I'm like, well, there's Santa Barbara, the town, and then the county next to it is Montecito, which is like, that's where Meghan and Harry went. That's where Ellen and Oprah live. Like there's a reason why people park it in that area, because it's just so stunning. And I think, again, being outside the cities, right, it makes a big difference. And Ojai is like 45 minutes inland from there and stuff. So it's like, that's the kind of California that's my vibe.
It makes a lot of sense when you say it like that. Like if you can have that connection to other places. But the problem with LA is it's so spread out and so sprawling that when you hit traffic, like you everywhere hit this huge circumference, like this massive bubble that surrounds LA. And it's like, when it's high traffic, don't go anywhere. So I think I would struggle with that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And there's lots and lots of California expats over here in Europe, both in Spain and UK, which is interesting. But I feel like I keep on chatting about me, but I want to do a quick rundown of some travel questions because, like, this is the thing. You're, like, so experienced in this. Okay, first thing I was going to say, to go back to your earlier point about when you were your first big trip abroad. Does that mean when you were a kid, you were primarily doing, like, the road trip factor? Like, in Australia, you were really staying local and domestic?
As a kid, yeah, we lived on an island on Tasmania. So as a kid, we didn't really travel. We would go to, usually we would go to Queensland. It's called the Gold Coast. I don't know if you're familiar, but yeah, that's typically like where you go as a family holiday. So we went there a few times. But other than that, like, I also grew up in a time where, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate, that travel just wasn't affordable, and especially international travel. And so
forget it.
Yeah, it was like not even on my family's radar. And so the first trip that I went on, it was so random, but I went to sing as part of a choir, so like 20 kids over in Hong Kong at a film premiere. And that's the first time I ever went overseas. And because of that, I became absolutely obsessed with foreign cultures. I went and studied Russian history at university. Like, I just became obsessed with understanding the world in which we live in on like a deeper level, you know, like to what you get taught in school. So then after that, I had to convince my parents one by one, because they couldn't afford to both go. They both worked full time. I convinced them if I could save the money from my part-time jobs at McDonald's and the supermarket, if I could save the money, they would join me. And so that's what I did. And then when I was in university, I started this blog, and here I am now 10 years later. Crazy.
Well, when I met you, was your dad with you on that trip?
Yeah, he was. And that was, you know what, that was actually supposed to be a boyfriend on that trip. And I got broken up with, and the flights were already booked. And so I had to change the name. And my dad was like, yeah, I'll come with you. And I also, it's quite funny because I've had my dad in LA with me. I've also had my mom in LA with me. And both of them are very from very small town farming communities. And both of them were like, this is not what I expected. The meals are huge. You have to pay tips. Like, they just didn't understand it. So yeah, it was really funny taking them, because I almost felt like I'd traveled so much at that time that I'd hit the reset button, and I was seeing it through someone's eyes who's like never left their hometown. So it was really fun.
But isn't that special? I love those experiences. It's why I love traveling with my mom when I can too, because like they get to live vicariously through you too. Even if they're not physically with you, they're following your adventures, and you can do the travel that maybe they were never able to, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't know about that. About the choir, which I think is cool. The other big factor, I think, when we're kids, of course, is we can't. You know, the power of pop culture. I always ask this, like, do you remember, was there a person, a book, a movie, or something you remember watching when you were a kid? You were like, oh, yeah, I got to travel.
So embarrassing. And
do it.
I shouldn't admit to this publicly, but it was the Mary-Kate and Ashley films.
Yeah. Yes. Listen, everything counts. Everything counts.
It was Holiday in the Sun, which was filmed in the Bahamas. It was Winning London, which was like a Harvard National Model United Nations competition in London, which I then went on to do a Harvard Model United Nations competition in Boston.
Oh my God. You had a really interesting childhood.
So random. And I just like really wanted to travel, and so I found ways to do it. Like both those trips. So the chorus, singing in the choir, and also the trip to Harvard Model UN, both of those were fundraised. So that was a way that I figured out, like, okay, I've just got to be like a really smart child, or like suddenly I'm singing. I'm not that good a singer, but yeah, so I would find out ways that I could do it without, you know, having to, you know, be born into like not extreme wealth. I mean, even, you know, at the time when I went on those trips, like, most people couldn't afford to travel. Like it just wasn't available to you. And now it's like, it was such a luxury back then. I feel fortunate to have seen it and experienced it when it was a luxury, because I'm so grateful for it. Whereas now I think kids these days like really struggled through the pandemic because they were like, I planned on traveling when I turned 18 and like now I can't do it. And it's like, yeah, but like that's such a privilege that you can do that. So yeah, I feel like
I think it's a really good point because a lot of people really forget like how travel was just nowhere to what it is now. It really was expensive and it really was far-fetched for a lot of families.
Yeah, and it still is today. And
yeah, it still is.
Something that I always think, like nearly everything I do is like nothing I would ever experience in my lifetime if it wasn't my career. So I'm constantly like the amount of stuff that it's not wasted on me. Like I'm constantly thanking people. And, you know, I'm someone who's sending like thank you cards or email, like constantly just like, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. And they're like, okay, but like you're doing a job for us too. But yeah.
That is a lost art though. And that says a lot about you, right? Because people they want to understand the person. And I think that gratitude goes such a long way. So that's really nice that you do that.
Thank you. I hope so. I hope you appreciate it because it is just something that like, no matter what, I mean, yeah, I'm just crazy. I can't even believe like talking about it is like, wow, I feel like I have lived my dream and now I'm kind of like, cool, I could like, you know, stop now and be happy, but I'm not going to. So.
No, and I was, well, and I was going to say too, I mean, I don't want to come across as being elitist in any way because first of all, I'm a huge bargain shopper. So like when I travel, I don't stay at Superfan. I'm like, I do Airbnb, I do low key, like inexpensive. I cook for myself a lot. Like that's how I like to travel. And I always talk, excuse me. So sorry. I always talk about certainly all the kids that I always say it's so important to be educated through travel and culture. But again, I don't mean like physically going somewhere. It could be watching a video. It could be reading a book. It could be having a different experience at your local museum. I mean, in my dreams, I would love to see like a big platform. I've thought about this for years, like an educational tool where there would be videos from kids around the world talking about languages and food and all that kind of thing. I think that kind of interactive experience would be amazing too, because we live in the global world where people are so aware. I have a little niece and nephew. As primarily, I wrote them a book when they were really little so that they could be excited about experiencing different things. And I hope that's not lost on I don't think it is. I think people are more curious than ever. But I'd like to see more accessibility for those experiences.
And I think that for me is a really interesting point because when I went overseas for that first time and being an impressionable age, and being so young and like the sensory overload of Hong Kong of all places, like the sights, the sounds, the smells, the language. People were so fascinated with me too because I have this bright red hair. So it was this equal cultural exchange of like, yeah, just being fascinated with the people that I was encountering, but them also being like, what is this big group of kids doing? And I remember getting stopped to take photos because of my hair, literally. And, yeah, but back then, like, you know, people were amazed to see blonde kids. Like, travel wasn't as widely accepted as it is today. So it was a really interesting time to be in it. And I like what you said about kids being exposed to it at that age where they are more impressionable and that's something that sticks with them and they really want to go and experience that. And, you know, I come from a very fortunate, very privileged place in being born in Australia, but not coming from a family who could afford those things. I think it's great to incentivize kids to find a way to be able to do that for themselves. So yeah, it was a really interesting age to be experiencing that. And I think I'm really passionate about encouraging other people to go and do that as well.
100%. I use the word, like, I always talk about celebrating, right? Because I think so many times sometimes there's an otherness where really it should be a celebration of all these things and understanding a lot more about history in that cultural context. I think, like, I'm really passionate about that. I think it's endlessly fascinating. And I think if you can connect the dots between certain things, or I love this food, where did that come from? Or I love this style of dress, where did that come from? I think that's really fascinating. Which leads into my question, and this can be a tough one to answer, but what foreign cultural experience made the biggest impact on you when you were traveling?
I would say, I would have to say it was about 3, maybe 4 years ago. I was invited to visit Pakistan, and just saying that country's name out loud elicited so many different reactions from people. And that is essentially why I chose to go. So I chose to go because people have this, I think in Pakistan, you could really recognize that it is a fairly outdated, vision towards what it is today. And I just kind of wanted to go and experience it for myself. And I remember maybe like 8 or 9 years ago telling people I was going to South Africa solo. And that was also met with such different mixed reactions, and people were like, really? Are you going to be safe? And I really second guessed my decisions. And so then to be able to have that opportunity to visit Pakistan, and I joined like a group of 9 people. So I didn't feel unsafe in that sense. I think like maybe if you were a solo traveler, there's a really great YouTuber, I think her name's Eva Beck, and she's traveled like all around Pakistan, Afghanistan, by herself, which is amazing. But yeah, I went on this 2-week trip to Pakistan and kind of just wanted to, I wasn't given any brief, like I didn't have to say anything positive. It was just, do you want to come? Like, we will pay for your flights to get there and everything while you're there. And then you can report on what you experienced. And that's basically what they wanted everyone who went to do. And for me, it was like the most hospitable people, so welcoming. I always find this, though, in cultures where people have the least, they give the most. And we were stuck in a landslide for like 10 hours, sat in a van, had no food, no water. And there were people running down from the mountains like, do you want to come into our home and we will cook you potatoes? Like, they were embarrassed. They were like, this is all we have to offer, but we will cook you potatoes. And it was just such a beautiful moment where you come from such a fortunate lifestyle. Like, you really realize in that moment, you're like, wow, when you're driving down the street, you're like, I'm so hungry, I'm so hungry, I'm so hungry. But you don't understand what hungry is compared to what these people endure on an everyday basis. So to be there and to have that hospitality was just like the most grounding experience of my life. And I wouldn't compare it to anything else in the world.
I've heard that a lot about the hospitality and the warmth of the people in Pakistan. Obviously, there's a large tie in London to that community as well. So I've always had the most wonderful experiences, and I'm very curious about it as well. So it's definitely high up there on me. It's funny because I was going to say, what destination pleasantly surprised you or thrilled you the most, but that sounds like that might be then in that top tier of experiences, or similar or the same.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's like anywhere that people say don't go, I have this overwhelming sense of like, okay, I'm going to go there, because not that I want to prove them wrong, but I want to understand for myself, and not be kind of swayed by like Western media. And a lot of these people who were saying don't go had never been. Like nearly
of course, everyone. It's always the peanut gallery giving their 2 cents.
And like, that you're going to be opening yourself up to some flack, like being an online personality in the travel space, like, that doing those, going to those more controversial places, you're going to be open to public opinion, and that's fine. But I don't think that anyone can say they know what Pakistan is like until they've been there. And also, it really bothers me how we put like an entire country's population into one bubble and say all those people are that way because of an event in history or something that's happened. Like, so many of those things are outside of the majority of the population's control that you can't say all those people are that. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense. I mean, it's funny because when people always ask me, like in London, they're like, are you American or are you Canadian, right? Waiting for the answer. And then if I say both, and they're almost like relieved, I feel like.
Yeah.
So, I mean, not that it's the same thing, but I mean, if you were solely responsible for like everything that, people talked about you or what was happening beyond your control or your government, it's like, it's a lot to take on,
Yeah. And I also think like borders and citizenships, like, for me, they feel super outdated. Like, we live in a very interconnected world. Everything is so globalized. And
no, me too. My big thing lately is age. I'm like, I can't take one more person being like, I should be doing this here at this time and this thing at this time. I'm like, what are you talking about? These are just constructs. Oh my God, it's crazy. Oh, it's wild. And I'll say this as a woman in my 40s. It's like, I'm friends with people of all ages, right? And I know, 20-year-olds that are very wise and and big thinkers and 60-year-olds that have like a ton to learn. And there's, people trying things at all ages. It doesn't matter. Like anybody that's trying to force something on you, like, ladies, don't worry about it. Just live your life. Wrap this up with two final questions. And one of them I think is most key because you again, stepped right out there into the world when you were very young. What would you tell your younger self about adventuring or learning from others around the world, especially women now?
Good question. I think I wish I was more educated before I stepped out into the world. Like when I first went overseas, like being 13 years old, you're so young. Like you really have no perspective of even like where your country is on like a global scale, So I wish I was more educated in that sense. And in terms of understanding at that age and probably through till like my early 20s, I didn't really even comprehend how fortunate as women we are in this day and age. So I didn't even understand that. And I don't even know if that was societally, like we weren't talking about it yet, or I came from such a privileged place in Australia where women do have, so many of the rights that we do, that so many countries don't have it. And maybe from being exposed to those cultures and countries where women still don't have the same equal rights as men or even close, that I have a better understanding of it.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess I just wish that I was more self-aware of how fortunate and privileged I am as an Australian woman. That's what I would say. Like I wish I had have understood that better to be able to connect, I guess, better, especially to women. Like you encounter so many women in so many of these countries and they're doing their best, they're doing what they can, and they're, dealing with the hand that they were dealt. But yeah, I guess if I was my 13 to 20-year-old self again, I wish I understood my privilege, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's something that comes with time, right? But 100%, like if you could flash back, it would just be such a different perspective, I guess, or a hunger for that learning. I agree. It's something for sure I wish that I had understood at a younger age. But you know what? We all learn.
Yeah, at least we get there eventually. But like some of the conversations that I've had, I would say in the last 5 years, are conversations that I never even understood I needed to have. Because when you come from a privileged place, like the worst thing you can do is not understand your privilege. And I think that's not spoken about enough. Like in Western cultures, we aren't made aware of how fortunate we are. Or maybe it's me. Like maybe I hadn't done the work to understand that. But yeah, I wish as a kid throughout education, it's almost like, that common thread of like everything you learn at school is kind of useless, and like I wish they taught us life skills, and I wish that was something that was more widely spoken about in Western cultures and in schools.
Me too. Although I will say that I love, this is why I love following like these young generations, especially on TikTok, because the conversations they're having are so different from when I was a kid, and I appreciate it so much. And again, I'm a white Western woman. I have nothing but privilege. And so, of course, there's tons of other kids that I grew up with that were having completely different experiences. And I regret, obviously, that I wasn't more supportive then, but I was an idiot. I was a kid. And so now I'm hoping to do better. I like to think that I was always supportive and had a good heart and came from a good place, but I'm trying to continually improve. And that's not something that everybody does. But I think travel is one of those things, or experiences in culture, that keeps on like taking the wool from over our eyes and really stepping outside of ourselves. It's so important. So on that final note, I would say for somebody who's traveled to over 80 countries, are there any plans for a country you've not been to yet, or something that you're like, this is my next destination when your next trip?
Yeah, I've got a little list of places I want to visit before my career kind of like reaches a, I definitely want to visit Greenland. All of the places I want to visit are so off the beaten path and like just completely different. I really want to visit all of the stands, like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, like all of the stands are really high on my list. Georgia, I would really like to go to as well, which is in the same kind of vicinity. And then Greenland, Mongolia, like I said, they're like super rogue, off the beaten path places. But I honestly think it's since visiting Pakistan that I feel like it's my purpose and like what I feel good doing to go to places where you don't typically think of going, especially as a solo female traveler. So anywhere like that, but also I have a limit, you know, like I've been invited a number of times to Saudi Arabia and I haven't been. So it's like, I will still choose places that I feel positive about promoting and feel, you know, like I can align with the current situation right now. So yeah, I think anywhere I haven't been, and I actually met in Pakistan on that trip was the youngest person in the world to travel to every country. Do you know Lexi Limitless?
Oh, I've seen her pop up, but I don't know enough about her story.
Yeah, so she was, when we were in Pakistan, she had a couple of countries left. She had to visit North Korea, which is really difficult with an American passport.
Yeah.
And I think she had to go back to, I can't think of where it was, but it was somewhere in the Middle East. So she had a couple of places left, and then she was awarded the youngest person. So that was really interesting to chat with her. And I would not like to be the quickest person to see everything.
Oh, no, not at all, because you want to have the experience. And I would, and for anybody listening, I mean, this is how I want to end it, but you should really, there's a lot of travel blogs I would not recommend, but Brooke's travel blog, World of Wanderlust, it's because there's so many, and I've referred to it too a lot of times because the lists, the experience, again, coming from a female solo traveler that has really walked the walk and is going to give you like real context and cultural experiences and her favorite tips, I would trust Brooke's suggestions over a lot of people's. So I would say go to that, check out, I'll link your blog, both your Instagrams, and I'm very excited for your bakery. If I make it down to Australia, I will 100% eat everything in the store because I also love sweet treats.